Hey vinyl community, Mark here again from Sound Matters, of course, covering all things vinyl. Today's topic is going to be a bit of a fun one for a lot of us. It's bad habits that will destroy your vinyl records. Now, for dyed-in-the-wool collectors, a lot of this stuff is going to be fairly obvious, but to new record collectors, of which there are many now out there, of course, some of it might not be as obvious as some of you may think. Let's get straight into it. So, bad habit number one is perhaps the most obvious, but probably the most important of all, and it's not touching the record surface or not touching the record groove. As clean as we might think our hands are, they do contain natural oils and sometimes even sort of grease and dirt as well. And when this adds on top of dust and things like that, then it only contributes to stylus wear and potentially even groove wear. So we want to handle our record by the outer edge at all times, and if we do accidentally slip up, we're all human, touch the record surface by mistake, then you want to get some record cleaning fluid on that just before you spin it as quickly as you can. Bad habit number two is stacking your records horizontally in a nice big pile, and it can seem like a perfectly innocent way to store records. We see this a lot with new collectors, but the problem is with this is the downward pressure, of course, on those records at the bottom can cause some bowing and some warping of those records, and in extreme circumstances may affect the playability of the record. We want to avoid this by stacking our records vertically, not too tightly packed together, of course, as well, because this can also then contribute to things like ring wear around the record jacket. So we have a wearing of the artwork on the front of the record jacket. So we want to stack our records vertically, and preferably we want to put them in outer record sleeves as well to protect that artwork. Point number three is leaving your records out, and this one of course will seem obvious, but we all know someone who's guilty of this, and of course, come on, admit it, you've occasionally left a record out on the turntable surface for perhaps longer than perhaps you should do. And worst of all, of course, we see people leaving records just on the sides of a table out of their sleeve and that sort of things. So not only are you going to be exposed to more dust if you leave your records out, but there's more potential for the record surface to get scuffed or damaged. So just take that extra moment to put it back in the sleeve, and your records will stay dust-free and in better condition for many years to come. Point number four is carelessly returning records to their sleeve. So when we do this, it can be very tempting to allow that record to just kind of drop into the record sleeve. Now, at best, you're going to punch a nice little hole down in that record sleeve quite quickly if you do this, particularly if it's a paper sleeve, maybe less so if it's a polyethylene sleeve, but could still happen. But at worst, we could risk scuffing or scratching the record over time. So we want to gently, without touching the record surface, of course, gently encourage it to slip down into the record surface. It helps if you kind of hold it horizontally rather than holding it very vertically, where it may just drop down in there. So that can help, and it's the best and safest way to return a record to its sleeve. Number five is bad cleaning practice. Now, if you search YouTube or the internet as a whole, you will find all kinds of questionable methods for cleaning records. And granted, if you ask 10 different people how to clean a record, you will get 10 slightly different responses, of course. Now, we all have our preferred methods, but from my perspective, there are certain kind of approaches that I think should absolutely be avoided. Anything from using kind of things like Windex or wood glue type methods, or just homemade concoctions with just far too much isopropyl alcohol in there. If you really must make your own record cleaning fluid at home, then always use distilled water and try and keep the amount of isopropyl alcohol in the mix as low as you possibly can. And lots of people kind of debate and will disagree perhaps on the amount of isopropyl alcohol that is safe, but I think even better still, go get yourself a tried and tested record cleaning fluid that's purpose made by a company that's tested it properly and knows what they're doing. Number six is queuing up records and lowering the tone arm by hand. And this is something, again, that you see a lot of new collectors doing. And of course, it's fraught with risk. The whole point of the cue arm that you use, the lever, is that this will gently lower the tone arm and stylus onto the record surface, minimizing the risk for your hand to slip and minimizing the kind of impact on the stylus. So you protect both the stylus, but you also protect the record and avoid you slipping across the record surface and causing a nice gouge into the record groove. So always use your cue lever, and ideally, if you do want to cue up your record so that you can play a particular track, then obviously you want to aim for that silence and do it by the cue lever. However, really in an ideal world, I would say it is better to lower the stylus down into the beginning of the record and just allow a record to play from the start of the side to the end of the side without interruption. But of course, you know, sometimes we want to just go to a particular track, and if you're going to do this, always use the cue arm and always wait for the track to stop before you then stop your turntable, and then use the cue arm again to raise the stylus from the record. But as I say, in an ideal world, it goes onto the record surface and it doesn't get touched until it gets to the end of that side, in an ideal world. Number 7 is a bad habit that a lot of people get into, particularly if they're kind of entertaining people and they kind of impatiently want to get to the other side of a record, and it's essentially not waiting for the platter to fully stop before flipping the record over and listening to side B. Now this is of course a surefire way to scratch up or scuff the other side of your record. You might be keen to get to that other side, but you know, a little patience goes a long way in terms of preserving your records so that they can serve you for many years to come. Number 8, and the last one that I will put on this list before I hand it over to you guys, is not changing your cartridge stylus as regularly as you should. You need to change that fairly regularly. Now they can last a very long time, and a diamond tip stylus, which, you know, diamonds are essentially the hardest surface known to man, by the way, they do eventually wear out. It might seem surprising, but when you consider the amount of distance it travels over many records, it's perhaps not surprising to think that, well, yeah, that's a lot of abuse for a very small tiny diamond tip to take, and eventually they will start to flatten out on some sides or wear down and misshape the stylus, and this can cause audible distortion, but at worst can actually start to wear your groove out faster on your record, so you'll actually have groove wear there. So this will damage, this is probably the most significant way to permanently damage a record beyond repair. So it's important that we keep tabs on our kind of stylus, make sure that it's not got any excessive wear, and I tend to kind of make a habit of changing a stylus anyway, just once every year or so, right? Now you can use a magnifying glass to kind of observe a stylus, or maybe even better still a USB microscope, but I just tend to make a good habit of keeping my records clean, keeping my stylus as clean as possible, and then I change that cartridge once every year just to be sure. So that concludes today's video. Thank you ever so much for watching. As always, what would you add to this list? What's a bad habit that should be avoided at all costs? So let us know down in the comments below. But if you're new to this channel, please do consider subscribing, and we'll see you in that next video. Keep spinning.